Every morning, he would sit on the same bench, never speaking to anyone, just quietly observing his surroundings. But that day, when he raised his arm and his shirt cuff slid back, everyone who saw it held their breath. Because that mark on his arm wasn't just a scar. It told the story of a war legend hidden for 40 years. Welcome to True Veteran Stories. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. We take pride in honoring our hero. Part 1. Silent Day. The wooden bench in the corner of Margaret Park welcomed its usual guest with the first light of morning. The elderly woman arrived every day at exactly 7 o'clock, sat in the same spot, and waited silently until 6 in the evening. The neighborhood knew her only as the bench lady. No one knew her real name. The residents of Elmwood had grown accustomed to this routine over 17 years. The old woman would sit on the same bench through every season, speaking to no one, simply watching people pass by, children playing, and squirrels hopping between the trees. Her attire never changed. Dark pants, a long-sleeved blouse, and a plain cardigan. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes held a deep sorrow no one could decipher. Sarah Mitchell owned Coffee Bean, the cafe next to the park. Every morning, she watched the old woman from her window and considered bringing her a cup of hot coffee, but the woman's cold gaze always deterred her. Once, Sarah had gathered the courage to approach her, only for the woman to turn her head away. Since then, Sarah had settled for a distant wave. Something happened to her, Sarah would say to Jackson, one of her regulars. People don't shut themselves off like that for no reason. Jackson Williams was a retired police officer. He enjoyed observing the old woman from his corner table in the cafe. She carries herself like a veteran, he mused. Look at her posture, the way she scans her surroundings, like she's waiting for danger. But that was just speculation. No one knew the truth about the old woman. As she sat on that bench day after day, her mind wandered to another world. When she closed her eyes, she was transported 40 years into the past, when she was young, strong, and full of dreams. Back then, her name was Elizabeth Harper. Part 2. Shadows of Memory. The year was 1983, on the island of Grenada. 22-year-old Elizabeth Harper would never forget the day she first put on her military uniform. Her father had opposed her decision to enlist. War is a man's business, Elizabeth, he had said. You're a girl. Marry, have children, live a normal life. But Elizabeth was conflicted. She had grown up in Phoenix, Arizona, dreaming of fighting injustice. When she was accepted into the military academy, she couldn't pass up the opportunity. The Grenada operation was her first real mission. She served in the medical corps. But in the midst of war, the line between doctor and soldier was thin. Operation Urgent Fury wasn't just a military mission. It was an experience that would change Elizabeth's life forever. Now, sitting on the bench in Margaret Park, the memories brought pain. When her hands trembled, she covered the scar on her arm. For 40 years, no one had seen it. For 40 years, no one had known her real story. As she watched children playing in the park, she thought of the children she never had. After returning from Grenada, there had been times when she wanted to marry and live a normal life. But the nightmares that came at night and the sudden panic attacks during the day had never allowed any relationship to last. PTSD, the doctors had said. Post-traumatic stress disorder. It's treatable. But Elizabeth had refused treatment. She had to be strong. She was a soldier. Soldiers didn't cry. Soldiers didn't break. Part 3. A hot summer day. That summer day, the temperature had climbed to nearly 104 degrees. Elizabeth sat on her usual bench, but this time, she wasn't wearing her cardigan, just a long-sleeved blue blouse. She was drenched in sweat, but still couldn't bring herself to roll up her sleeve. The park was busier than usual. It was one of the last days of summer, and families were having their final picnics. Children shouted, ran, and played. As Elizabeth watched them, a faint smile appeared on her face, a rare sight. As noon approached, shouts came from the other end of the park. An elderly man had collapsed, suffering a heart attack. People panicked, unsure what to do. "Someone call an ambulance," a young woman screamed. The moment Elizabeth saw what was happening, she instinctively stood. The medical training she'd received 40 years ago flashed in her mind as if she'd learned it yesterday. She rushed to the old man's side with quick strides. "Step back," she ordered, her voice firm. It was the first time she had spoken in the park. She knelt beside the man, checking his pulse. His heart had stopped. She began CPR. Sweat dripped down her face as she performed chest compressions, her sleeves sliding up her arms. That was when everyone saw it. On Elizabeth's left forearm, stretching from elbow to wrist, was a deep, jagged scar. But this wasn't an ordinary injury. The shape, the depth, the burn marks around it. This was a war wound. Among the crowd, Jackson Williams, the retired cop, held his breath. He recognized that scar. He'd seen similar ones in Vietnam veterans. But this was different, deeper, more painful looking. Elizabeth worked on the man for 10 minutes. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was breathing again. The paramedics said her quick intervention had saved his life. But Elizabeth didn't want praise. The moment she realized her scar had been exposed, she quickly pulled her sleeve down. She returned to her bench as if nothing had happened, sitting in silence once more. After the crowd dispersed, Jackson gathered his courage and approached her. "Hello," he said respectfully, I'm Jackson, retired police officer. What you did back there was incredible. Elizabeth didn't turn to look at him. That scar, Jackson continued carefully. It's from the war, isn't it? This time, Elizabeth slowly turned her head. Her eyes held a fear and pain no one had seen in 40 years. Please, she whispered, her voice pleading. Please go away. Part 4. Jackson's curiosity. Jackson couldn't sit still that night. The image of Elizabeth's scar haunted him. In his 30 years as a cop, he'd seen thousands of wounds, but Elizabeth's was different. That scar told a story. The next morning, he arrived at Coffee Bean earlier than usual. Sarah had just opened. Morning, Jackson, she said. You're early. Sarah, Jackson said. What do you know about that old woman? Sarah paused while setting up the coffee machine. Which old woman? The one who sits on the bench every day. Yesterday, she saved a man's life. I saw the scar on her arm. Sarah's eyes widened. What kind of scar? Jackson told her what he'd seen. As she listened, Sarah nearly dropped a coffee cup. 17 years, she murmured. 17 years, and she's never spoken to anyone. We don't even know her name. I can check police records, Jackson offered. Maybe there's something. But Sarah shook her head. Jackson, she clearly wants to be left alone. Maybe there's a reason for that. Jackson knew Sarah was right, but his curiosity, empathy, and old cop instincts pushed him to dig deep. That afternoon, he called an old police contact. Detective Mike Rodriguez was still on active duty and had been Jackson's former partner. Mike, Jackson said, I need a favor. There's an old woman who lives around Margaret Park. 17 years, and no one knows her name. Can you look into it? Mike found the request odd, but agreed to help. A few days later, he called back. Jackson, this is strange. There are records of elderly women in the area over the last 20 years, but none who live in the park. Maybe she's homeless. Or maybe she's not in the system at all, Jackson mused. That night, Jackson began searching military records online. The shape of Elizabeth's scar stuck in his mind. Wounds like that usually came from explosive, and they only happened in war zones. Part 5. Tracing the truth. Jackson's research took weeks. Meanwhile, Elizabeth kept coming to the park, though she now seemed uneasy around Jackson. Every time he approached, she turned away as if he weren't there. One evening, while researching 1980s military operations at the library, Jackson stumbled upon an article about the Grenada invasion, Operation Urgent Fury, in 1983. The article included photos of female soldiers who had served. When Jackson turned the page, his breath caught. There she was, a young woman in uniform. The caption read, Lieutenant Elizabeth Harper, Medical Corps. The young woman looked just like Elizabeth, 40 years younger, of course, but the facial features, the eyes, Jackson knew it wasn't a coincidence. The article had a brief note about Elizabeth, wounded during the Grenada operation, awarded the Purple Heart, discharged from military service in 1984. Jackson quickly photographed the page. He was sure now he knew who she was. But the real question was, what had happened in Grenada? The next day, Jackson began searching military archives. Most records were classified, but he found basic detail. Elizabeth Harper, born 1961, from Phoenix, Arizona, graduated from Military Academy in 1982, assigned to the Medical Corps, deployed to Grenada in 1983, honorably discharged in 1984 with a Purple Heart. But the real story wasn't in official records. Jackson started browsing veterans forums. There, some soldiers shared memories of that operation. One post stood out. I had a friend who served in Grenada in '83, female officer, Medical Corps, unbelievably brave. During an attack, she ran into a bombed-out area to save wounded soldiers. A grenade went off, tore up her arm, but she saved 5 of our guys. I'll never forget her name, Elizabeth Harper. Jackson's eyes welled up as he read. Elizabeth was a hero, so why was she sitting alone on a park bench now? Part 6. Sarah's plan. Jackson shared his findings with Sarah. She cried as she listened. That woman is a hero, she said. But why is she so alone? Why won't she talk to anyone? Jackson explained what he knew about PTSD. Some war veterans are like that. The trauma runs so deep they can't return to normal life. Sarah made a decision. Jackson, I think we should reach out to her, but the right way, with respect, with understanding. But Jackson hesitated. Sarah, she clearly wants to be left alone. Maybe you're right, but Jackson, you saw that scar. She fought for our country. Now she's suffering alone. Don't we owe it to her to help? Sarah was right. Elizabeth needed help. That much was clear. But how could they approach her? Sarah decided. The next day she would bring Elizabeth a cup of coffee, and this time she wouldn't take no for an answer. Part 7. First Contact. The next morning, Sarah walked into the park with 2 cups of coffee. Elizabeth was in her usual spot. Sarah approached slowly. Hello, Sarah said softly. I'm Sarah. I own the cafe over there. I brought you some coffee. Elizabeth looked at her. Her gaze was stern. I don't want any, Elizabeth said curtly. Sarah didn't back down. I know you don't like to be disturbed, but sometimes a hot coffee is nice. Elizabeth studied her for a long moment. Then, why? Because, Sarah said, I've seen you here for 17 years. Every day, every season, and you're always alone. I don't think anyone should be alone. Elizabeth seemed to soften slightly. She slowly reached out and took the coffee. "Thank you," she said. It was the first polite words she'd spoken. Sarah asked if she could sit. Elizabeth nodded. The two drank their coffee in silence. Sarah wanted to talk but didn't want to push. "Good coffee," Elizabeth finally said. "Thank you." Sarah smiled. "I make it myself." "My name is Elizabeth," the old woman said. "Elizabeth Harper." Sarah's heart leapt. She finally had a name. "It's nice to meet you, Elizabeth. How long have you been in this neighborhood?" Elizabeth thought for a moment. "A long time. A very long time." Sarah wanted to ask more, but decided to wait. "I've been here a long time too," she said instead. "It's a nice neighborhood. Quiet." Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, quiet." They sat in silence a few more minutes before Sarah stood. "Elizabeth, should I bring coffee again tomorrow?" Elizabeth looked at her. Something in her eyes had changed. "Okay," she said. Part 8. Building Trust. Sarah began bringing Elizabeth coffee every day. The first week, they only exchanged greetings and drank in silence. By the second week, Elizabeth started small talk about the weather, the park's beauty. Jackson watched from a distance, pleased with Sarah's progress, but unsure if it was time to reveal what he knew. In the third week, Elizabeth shared something small. "I used to be a doctor." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? What kind?" "Military doctor," Elizabeth said. "Long time ago." Sarah told Jackson, who felt it was finally time to speak to Elizabeth himself. One day, as Sarah and Elizabeth drank their coffee, Jackson approached. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I'm Jackson, retired cop. I'd like to know you." Elizabeth tensed. "What do you want?" Jackson held out a folder. "Elizabeth, you're a hero, but do you know that?" Elizabeth didn't take it. "What are you talking about?" "You served in Grenada in 1983. You saved 5 soldiers. You were awarded the Purple Heart." Elizabeth paled. She tried to stand, but Jackson continued. "Elizabeth, you're a veteran. You fought for your country. You were wounded, but now you're sitting here alone." Elizabeth glared at him. "None of your business." "It is," Jackson said, "because you're a hero, and heroes shouldn't be forgotten." Elizabeth stood abruptly and walked away. Sarah ran after her. "Elizabeth, wait!" Elizabeth turned. Tears filled her eyes. "Leave me alone," she whispered. "Please." Part 9. Elizabeth didn't return to the park for days. Sarah and Jackson grew worried. "I scared her," Jackson said guiltily. "I pushed too hard." Sarah tried to reassure him. "No, Jackson, you did the right thing, but she needs time." On the 4th day, Elizabeth returned, but she was different. More fragile, more vulnerable. Sarah brought her coffee as usual. Elizabeth took it silently. "What Jackson said, it's true," Elizabeth suddenly admitted. Sarah froze. Elizabeth wanted to talk. "I served in Grenada, Medical Corps." But her voice trembled. "That day, that horrible day." Sarah held her hand. "You don't have to tell me." "No," Elizabeth said. "I want to. I haven't told anyone in 40 years." She took a deep breath and began. Part 10. The Secrets of Grenada. October 25, 1983, Elizabeth said. "We were stationed near Point Salines airfield in Grenada. I was a lieutenant in the Medical Corps, 22 years old, thinking I could save the world." Sarah listened quietly. Jackson had also approached, sitting nearby. "That morning, the intel was wrong," Elizabeth continued. "The enemy was stronger than we thought. While securing the airfield, we came under heavy fire." Her voice shook as memories resurfaced. 5 of our men were wounded, 2 critical. Sergeant Rodriguez's leg was gone. Private Martinez had shrapnel in his chest. I had to get them to safety. She paused, eyes distant. But the safe zone was nearly 200 yards away, and enemy positions were between us. Sarah tried to imagine Elizabeth's courage. "I made 3 trips," Elizabeth said, "carrying 1 wounded each time. On the 4th trip, a grenade went off, tore my arm apart, but I still had 2 men left to save." She showed her scar. Even after 40 years, it looked brutal. The 5th soldier, Private Johnson, was only 19, from Texas. He'd shown me a letter to his mom. After the grenade, my arm was useless, but I couldn't leave him. Jackson pictured the scene. Elizabeth wounded, still pushing forward. I carried him on my back, 200 yards, under fire, blood pouring from my arm. I was passing out, but I couldn't leave Johnson. Elizabeth stopped. Tears fell. "I saved him. I saved all 5. But," her voice broke, "the cost was too high." Part 11. Beyond the Scars. Elizabeth closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as if reliving that day. "When I came home, they gave me the Purple Heart. Newspapers called me a hero, but no one. She struggled. No one saw the nightmares, the way I'd flinch at loud noises, how I couldn't talk to people. It's been 40 years, and I still smell the smoke, hear the screams. Sarah squeezed her hand. Jackson bowed his head in respect. Elizabeth, Sarah said gently, you're not alone anymore. You don't have to be. Elizabeth opened her eyes. For the first time, a faint light shone through the sorrow. Maybe, she whispered. Jackson pulled a photo from his folder. Young Elizabeth, smiling proudly in uniform. This is who you really are. Heroism isn't just that day. It's every day after. You survived, and now, by sharing your story, you're being brave again. Elizabeth stared at the photo, as if reuniting with her younger self. What happens now? She asked, her voice fragile but curious. Sarah smiled. Now, we finish our coffee. Then maybe tomorrow we visit the Veterans Association, or just sit in the park and enjoy the sun, your choice. Elizabeth thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe we can do both. Jackson wiped his eyes and stood. I'll stop by sometimes too, tell you some old cop stories, if you'll have me. Elizabeth gave a small, hesitant smile. Deal. That evening, as the sun set, Elizabeth sat on her usual bench, but this time, Sarah was beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Perhaps scars weren't just marks of pain, but also of strength. And perhaps the silent days would slowly turn into shared words. The end.